Hi everybody, this is Ian Grayling. This is a quick screencast to explain why we are bothering, if you like, to revisit assessment and tracking in maths and English. Surely this is something we do all the time. What is there new to add to what we do? Well, our research and experience in delivering this program for the foundation is that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of provider institutions are not really implementing assessment for learning at all, even though they believe they are. They're doing something else, and we'll explain that shortly. And also, they're not tracking individual progress reliably. And this means that aggregated data for MIS purposes or headline accountability also lacks validity and reliability. And there are a whole host of other issues to do with individuals' resilience, self-efficacy and motivation, which if we don't get assessment and tracking right, then we are not doing the learner any favours. So what this program is about is really, in some ways, it's about questioning the dominant paradigm, the received wisdom about assessment and tracking. And I think it's fair to say that the Foundation's view is in keeping with ours, that the dominant paradigm needs to change. It is no longer viable. It doesn't help. We need to reimagine how we do assessment and tracking. So um, in a quick fire sort of fun way, relating to the idea that if we always follow the existing paradigm, even when it's not working, then all we do is get more of the same. And the problem about paradigms is that if we're stuck in the old one, it becomes very hard to actually see the new one, because you can't, it's that thing about you can't understand or solve the new problems, which are those caused by the paradigm that we're in. I could probably say that more clearly, but hopefully you get the idea. Anyway, let's do this very, very quickly then. So let's look at some statements. The best way to motivate learners at the start of their program is to give them lots of initial assessment tests. Of course, that's false, but we do it. We're doing it all the time, and we need to break out of the idea that we have to do it. The Ofsted or funding agencies require us to screen so rapidly at the beginning of the program, when in fact it is not quite as pressured as that, even though the provider organisation might try and tell its practitioners that that is the case. Here's another one. ILPs are updated continually and valued as the way to demonstrate individual progress and celebrate achievement. Not in our experience. They are in certain pockets of very good practice, but in the main, they are often regarded as a bureaucratic and pointless exercise and are not respected by either learners or practitioners. I always know how every learner is doing at any time. That's relatively rare, and that lack of knowledge of where every learner is at any point can happen even in a face-to-face classroom or workshop delivered session. Imagine how that is amplified if a learner is not with the practitioner. They're on placement either as because they're on a study program or on an apprenticeship program. So if we don't know how every learner is doing at any time, how can we design learning activities so that that information becomes automatically available to us as a practitioner without us having to go looking for it? So learners know best if they can or can't do it. Well, of course they do. We may be expert in teaching and learning, but we don't have the superhuman powers of mind reading. We have to rely on the learner letting us know whether they are breezing through this learning activity or whether they're getting somewhat confused, anxious and stuck. I don't have enough time for on-demand diagnostic support with every learner. Well, we hear this all the time. But of course, if you don't have enough time, how can you be sure that you're meeting every learner's needs, and how can we be sure that we're getting that level of data collection which is valid and reliable when aggregated for MIS or headline accountability measures? The key thing here, of course, is that no teacher has time to do on-demand diagnostic support, particularly if they're trying to teach didactically. It just doesn't work. So there needs to be thought about how we do learning design, which gives the teacher that time to act in a more facilitative way rather than teaching all the time from the front. So don't really need to say anything further about this, but in other than in our experience, a lot of performance data is recorded on systems like, or individual data is recorded on systems like ProMonitor. It's often fed in by progress coaches who may interview a learner 4 times during their program. Now, that surely raises the question: how can we trust the validity and reliability of that data? And certainly, it does not yield day-to-day, week-to-week information on learner progress and support needs. So finally, mobile and digital technologies. There seems to be sometimes a bit of a resistance in the sector to explore how this can be used. These can be used to support assessment and tracking. It is essential that we do in this day and age, particularly where learners are on placements because they're on study programs or apprenticeships. It is ridiculous, quite frankly, that we have to wait till an assessor goes out to the workplace to find that the learner has got stuck some weeks before. We need to know where every learner is at all times, and in this day and age of Skype, email, etc., Edmodo, whatever, we should be able to be in touch with our learners and their progress at any given time on demand. Just finally, for a bit of fun here, and this is returning to, it has a serious point about the received wisdom and the paradigm that we've been left with. Initial and what assessment? I'm sure you'll all be shouting at the screen, diagnostic, but the question is, why is diagnostic assessment so closely related to initial assessment? Doesn't diagnostic assessment occur all the way through the program, or shouldn't it occur all the way through the program? Why have we got it linked to initial in this way? It's because we have a chronological view of assessment. We do initial assessment, then formative assessment throughout the program, and summative assessment. Now that is, it's not an invalid way of thinking about it, but it masks a more important understanding of the process, because all assessment is essentially diagnostic, and all diagnostic assessment is assessment for learning. It supports learning, and initial assessment is not initial assessment at all. It's actually initial review, in our view, which is often supported by diagnostic assessment to clarify what the learner has brought to the table, as it were. Let's do another one. Well, this one is pretty easy because you'll all be saying assessment for learning. Yet, there are other ways of understanding it, such as assessment as learning, as a metacognitive process, and our research and our program that we are delivering at the moment stresses assessment can actually be integral to learning itself and be part of it. So it can be a metacognitive process which we know yields better outcomes for learners. Yet the practice in many organisations is retrospective testing, interim summative testing, if you like, at points along the learning journey, which is not assessment for learning. It is always happening after the learning has taken place, or more likely may have been blocked, and we don't know it until we do that test, by which time learners' resilience and self-efficacy may well be damaged quite badly. So our argument then is that the received wisdom, the existing paradigm about assessment and tracking in maths and English and across the entire curriculum isn't really working as well as it should be. And at the time is right, I think, particularly with regard to the all the concerns about low resilience and self-efficacy in English and maths, and this sort of constant need for valid and reliable data. The time is right to reimagine what assessment and tracking should look like. So with this in mind, we developed 12 effective practice guidelines, all evidence-based, to support a program of development for practitioners and managers. It's important to note that these 12 effective practice guidelines are somewhat of a job lot. It doesn't really work that an organisation can pick, say, 2 of the guidelines which they feel are easy to do maybe, and just implement them and expect to get a significant impact in terms of improvement. The effective practice guidelines are to a large extent mutually reinforcing, and really they need to be considered as a whole lot and a whole organisational approach. So this is why we need to get to managers, as it were, as well as practitioners. In the main, we're finding practitioners are very, very supportive of these effective practice guidelines, but they often tell us that managers need to, if you like, enable them to do things differently. Managers are often squeezed from above and below to achieve targets, and asking them to sort of approve wholesale redesign of schemes of work and how we deliver sessions, how we design learning is, can be quite a big ask. So this is why we like to bring them together with practitioners on a training session. The managers are actually there just for the morning only in a particular room, separate to the practitioners, and they look at the guidelines from a more strategic perspective and the implications that they create for how their practitioners will work. The practitioners will be looking at it in terms of their professional practice and will be there for the full day, but over a working lunch, managers and practitioners come together to discuss implementation issues from their various their different perspectives. This is why it would be quite useful if managers bring their practitioners from the same organisation or vice versa, because then that enables them to carry on the development out of the training session back in the institution itself. Although it is not a requirement, it's not essential. If managers come along without practitioners and vice versa, that's fine as well. I think that's essentially it. Please feel free to contact me if you have any more questions about this, and please do promote the message out there that this isn't assessment and tracking as we know it. This is different. The implications, as I said earlier on, are both significant and far-reaching. So thanks for listening. Best of luck with it. Thank you.